There are moments in life when a person senses that something essential is missing, yet cannot quite name what it is. The days move forward, the obligations multiply, and the inner voice that once whispered of potential begins to fade beneath routine and noise. Many people live in this quiet tension, wanting to improve their lives, yet feeling overwhelmed by the enormity of the task. They search for dramatic transformations, waiting for a single breakthrough that will erase years of distraction, confusion, or stagnation. But genuine change rarely comes as a thunderclap. More often, it arrives through small and patient steps, habits that, repeated with intention, reshape the inner landscape of the human being. In every generation, people have wrestled with the same fundamental question: how does one rise above the inertia of ordinary life and walk toward a higher version of oneself? Some imagine that the answer lies in discovering hidden secrets or obscure techniques. Others believe improvement is a matter of willpower alone, but the struggle is deeper. It is not merely about acquiring new behaviors. It is about reorienting one's life toward purpose, toward clarity, toward an inner coherence that stands firm even when storms are near. Human beings often underestimate the quiet forces shaping their destiny. They assume that the great turning points of life are external: a job offer, a new relationship, a stroke of luck, an unexpected shift in circumstance. But the true turning points happen internally, through the habits that guide one's thoughts, emotions, and actions. Each repeated act, whether noble or unrefined, carves a path within the soul. The ancients compared the human heart to soft wax. Whatever presses itself upon it repeatedly leaves a lasting imprint. And so the person one becomes is, in large part, the sum of the habits one cultivates or neglects. Yet modern life has made this inner work more difficult. The mind is pulled in 1,000 directions. Distraction has become a constant companion. Attention is splintered by noise, by speed, by an endless stream of stimuli that demand immediate response but offer little nourishment. In such an environment, it is easy to drift away from oneself, to lose the ability to think clearly, to reflect deeply, to act with intention instead of impulse. People become strangers to their own minds, unable to sit quietly with their thoughts, unable to distinguish the essential from the trivial. This is the human dilemma, the desire for a better life constrained by the internal fragmentation that modern life breeds. Improvement seems desirable but difficult. Discipline appears noble but distant. The individual senses the possibility of transformation but lacks a structure that can sustain it. They know they need change, yet the idea of transforming everything at once is overwhelming, and so they remain in place, aware of what could be, yet unable to move toward it. Here, the wisdom of ancient philosophy becomes unexpectedly relevant. For Maimônides, one of the most profound thinkers of the medieval world, the key to human flourishing was not perfection, but direction. He understood that the human being is shaped not by occasional moments of greatness, but by the steady and intentional habits that guide daily life. Improvement does not require sudden revolution. It requires the cultivation of order, clarity, and purpose in the small acts that repeat themselves day after day. Maimônides saw the soul as a complex harmony of intellect, emotion, and action. When any one of these faculties becomes unbalanced, the entire being suffers. Daily habits, therefore, are not merely practical routines. They are instruments that tune the inner harmony of the human being. They discipline the mind, strengthen the character, and direct the heart toward what is true and meaningful. Through habits, one becomes capable of ethical refinement, intellectual clarity, and spiritual elevation. But the modern dilemma persists. How does one begin? People fear that improvement requires dramatic sacrifice or radical change. Yet the deepest transformations begin with small, powerful habits that reshape the inner structure of life. These habits create a foundation upon which clarity emerges, discipline grows, and meaning unfolds. They awaken a sense of agency, a recognition that even in a chaotic world, one possesses the ability to steer one's life toward purpose. Maimônides insisted that the human being has immense potential, far greater than most realize. But this potential must be trained, guided, and cultivated. Without healthy habits, the mind becomes clouded, the emotions excessive, and the actions erratic. With proper habits, the individual gains mastery over the self, and this mastery becomes the foundation for all forms of improvement: intellectual, ethical, emotional, and spiritual. This script explores 10 powerful habits that can instantly begin to elevate a person's life. They are not shortcuts. They are not empty affirmations. They are principles grounded in the deepest insights of Maimonides' philosophy, translated into practical steps for the modern world. They are habits that strengthen clarity, deepen self-respect, and awaken the inner capacity for growth. They address the whole human being, mind, body, and soul, because true improvement cannot be partial. It must touch every layer of one's existence. Each habit is a lens through which to view life differently. Each habit helps dismantle the inner barriers that keep a person from living with intention and wisdom. Together, they form a path toward a more coherent, balanced, and dignified existence. They do not promise perfection, but they promise movement. They allow the individual to reclaim authorship over their life and move from confusion to clarity, from passivity to direction, from fragmentation to unity. Maimonides believed that the purpose of human life is to rise in understanding, in character, in devotion, in truth. But rising requires foundation. It requires practices that strengthen the interior world. In a time when everything seems unstable, these habits restore stability. In a world that encourages distraction, these habits restore focus. In a culture that celebrates superficiality, these habits restore depth. The question every person must ask is simple: what kind of life am I willing to build? If the answer is a life grounded in wisdom, clarity, and purpose, then these habits become not just recommendations, but necessities. They shape the architecture of the soul. To understand how these 10 habits can elevate one's life, we must step into the intellectual and spiritual world of Maimonides, for it is there that the foundation of these practices is formed. Maimonides did not separate philosophy from everyday living. To him, the highest truths were meaningful only if they shaped the character and behavior of the individual. Knowledge, in his view, must flow into action, and action must reflect understanding. It is from this unified vision that the power of daily habits emerges. Maimonides lived in a time of intellectual flourishing and intense cultural exchange. His world was shaped by Jewish tradition, Greek philosophy, Islamic scholarship, and medical science. Yet, instead of being overwhelmed by this diversity, he found harmony in it. He sought the underlying structure of reality, the principles that guide the human being toward truth, balance, and fulfillment. His writings reveal a mind deeply committed to understanding the human condition and equally committed to improving it. One of Maimonides' core teachings, found in his 8 chapters and expanded throughout the Mishneh Torah, is the doctrine of the golden mean. Every human virtue, he explained, lies between 2 extremes: excess and deficiency. Courage lies between cowardice and recklessness. Generosity lies between miserliness and wastefulness. Humility lies between arrogance and self-abasement. To cultivate virtue, one must cultivate habits that steer one's character toward balance. This is not a passive state, but an active pursuit, a continuous adjustment, like a sailor who monitors the winds and adjusts the sails to stay on course. The 10 habits presented in this script are deeply rooted in this pursuit of balance. They are not rigid commandments, but tools that help align the inner faculties of the human being. the intellect, the emotions, and the actions. When these faculties are harmonized through consistent practice, the person becomes capable of clarity, resilience, and ethical refinement. Maimônides also emphasized the central role of the intellect in human life. In the Guide for the Perplexed, he argued that the intellect is the highest faculty of the soul, the one that enables a human being to understand the world, to discern what is true, and ultimately to approach the divine. But intellectual clarity does not emerge in a chaotic mind. It requires discipline, reflection, and habits that refine the ability to concentrate and reason. Modern life often weakens these capacities, but the habits inspired by Maimônides restore them. Yet Maimônides was far from an abstract thinker disconnected from practical concerns. As a physician, he understood the physical foundations of mental and spiritual health. He wrote extensively about diet, rest, emotional regulation, and the importance of moderation in bodily practices. He believed that the body and soul are deeply intertwined, and that neglecting one inevitably harms the other. A person seeking wisdom must therefore cultivate habits that strengthen both their physical and mental well-being. A cluttered body leads to a cluttered mind. A disciplined body supports a disciplined soul. This holistic approach appears clearly in his writings on ethics. Maimônides taught that moral excellence is not achieved through occasional acts of virtue, but through repeated habits that train the character. Just as a musician becomes excellent not through inspiration, but through practice, so too does a person become virtuous through consistent intentional behavior. A single act of generosity does not create a generous person. Many repeated acts do. A single moment of self-restraint does not create discipline. Daily repetition does. Habits are the sculptors of virtue. Central to Maimônides' worldview is the idea that human beings are capable of rising above their immediate impulses and living with intentionality. He believed the human mind, when properly trained, can direct the emotions rather than be enslaved by them. But this mastery requires awareness and practice. Emotional habits, the patterns of response to stress, disappointment, or desire, shape the soul just as much as physical habits shape the body. And so, the 10 habits outlined in this script address not only the external aspects of life, but also the unseen emotional habits that define one's inner world. Another key element of Maimônides' perspective is humility. Not the false humility of self-belittlement, but the humility that arises from understanding one's place in the universe. He taught that humility opens the door to wisdom because it frees the mind from arrogance, certainty, and the illusion of complete self-sufficiency. Habits that foster gratitude, contemplation, and inner quietude help cultivate this humility. A humble person listens, learns, and grows. An arrogant person remains trapped within the limits of their assumptions. The habits also reflect Maimônides' belief in the gradual nature of change. He frequently warned against extreme or sudden shifts in behavior, insisting that the soul requires time to adjust. Just as a wound heals slowly, the character strengthens gradually. Improvement is not theatrical, it is steady. This is why habits are so powerful. They respect the natural rhythm of transformation. They work with the human psyche, not against it. One of Maimônides' most profound teachings concerns the alignment of external action and internal intention. He taught that an act gains its true meaning when it flows from a conscious and refined mind. Habits are not meant to be mechanical. They are meant to awaken awareness. They teach a person to live deliberately, to bring presence into daily activities, to infuse the ordinary with intention. When habits are practiced with awareness, they become instruments of spiritual growth. Finally, Maimônides believed that the ultimate purpose of life is to approach truth, not only through study, but through the refinement of one's character. The 10 habits are therefore not merely strategies for personal success. They are steps toward a life aligned with wisdom. They help a person ascend from distraction to purpose, from confusion to clarity, from fragmentation to harmony. They create the inner conditions necessary for the soul to rise toward understanding, and through understanding, toward the divine. With this perspective in mind, the 10 habits gain their true meaning. They are not isolated practices, but expressions of a deeper philosophical and spiritual architecture. They guide the individual toward balance, clarity, awareness, and virtue, the pillars of a meaningful life. To understand the true power of these 10 habits, we must look beyond the practical and enter the spiritual dimension in which Maimônides rooted all human development. For him, the human being was not a random collection of impulses or a creature driven only by instinct. The human being was a deliberate creation, endowed with intellect, capable of perceiving order within the universe, and therefore capable of approaching its source. Habits, then, were not merely tools of self-improvement, but rungs of a ladder that elevate the soul toward greater clarity, greater harmony, and greater closeness with the divine. Maimônides taught that the human soul is shaped by its actions. Just as physical exercise strengthens the body, repeated spiritual and ethical practices strengthen the inner faculties that allow one to perceive truth. He believed that the heart becomes what it repeatedly contemplates, and the mind becomes what it repeatedly practices. When habits are aligned with wisdom, they polish the intellect and purify the emotions. When aligned with distraction, indulgence, or impulsiveness, they cloud the mind and weigh down the soul. Every habit, therefore, carries spiritual weight. In the Guide for the Perplexed, Maimônides explained that true spiritual growth begins not in mystical experiences, but in refinement of character and clarity of thought. The path upward is not dramatic or otherworldly. It is rooted in disciplined daily living. When one cultivates habits that strengthen awareness, concentration, humility, and moderation, one prepares the soul for deeper forms of understanding. The divine is not approached through noise, but through quiet. It is not approached through chaos, but through order. Habits that bring order to the inner world open the gates of spiritual perception. This is the spiritual synthesis, the recognition that habits shape not only the quality of life, but also the quality of soul. To examine these habits is to examine the architecture of one's inner being. One of the most profound ideas Maimônides offers is that the divine is encountered primarily through understanding, not merely intellectual understanding, but the kind that transforms one's entire being. He believed that when a person learns, reflects, and aligns their actions with truth, they experience what he called the intellectual love of God. This love is not emotional in the ordinary sense. It is a state of clarity in which the mind recognizes the order in creation and the soul resonates with it. Habits are the training ground for this clarity. They teach the mind to focus, the emotions to settle, and the spirit to rise. Consider the habit of intentional reflection. Maimônides understood that the ability to look inward honestly is a rare gift. Without self-examination, a person drifts. But with it, they gain the power to see their own tendencies, to correct errors, and to approach life with greater wisdom. Reflection is a spiritual act, for it awakens the mind to its own potential and reveals the distance between who one is and who one can become. In that distance lies the possibility of ascent. Or consider the habit of moderation. In the eyes of Maimônides, moderation was not merely a practical virtue, but a sacred one. Extremes distort perception, but balance clarifies it. A person who lives in constant excess, whether physical, emotional, or intellectual, clouds the inner lens through which truth is seen. Moderation, therefore, becomes a means of purifying the soul. By learning to restrain desire, temper emotion, and guide behavior with wisdom, the individual frees the intellect to rise beyond the pull of instinct. Another habit central to this spiritual synthesis is the cultivation of gratitude. Gratitude was, for Maimônides, a profound acknowledgement of one's relationship with the divine order. It is the recognition that existence itself is a gift, that every moment is sustained by forces beyond one's control. Gratitude softens the heart and opens the mind. It removes arrogance and replaces it with humility, which is the foundation of wisdom. A grateful heart learns to see blessings in the ordinary, and through that vision, the soul becomes capable of deeper connection. Habits of learning and study also carry spiritual significance. Maimônides believed that knowledge elevates the soul because it allows the mind to comprehend the structure of reality. When a person studies with intention, they participate in an act of divine imitation, aligning their mind with the wisdom embedded in creation. But study alone is not enough. It must be accompanied by habits of ethical behavior. Knowledge without virtue corrupts. Knowledge with virtue transforms. In this way, each of the 10 habits becomes a thread in the tapestry of spiritual development. They are not isolated practices, but expressions of a harmonious inner architecture. Taken together, they shape a person who is capable of clarity without arrogance, action without impulsiveness, humility without weakness, and devotion without fanaticism. This is the balanced soul that Maimônides described, a soul that moves steadily toward understanding. Another key element in this spiritual synthesis is the role of silence. Maimônides often warned against excessive speech, particularly speech without purpose. Silence is not the absence of sound, it is the presence of awareness. When the mind becomes quiet, it becomes receptive. Habits that cultivate silence, whether through contemplation, restraint, or purposeful solitude, create space for the intellect to awaken. In silence, one becomes capable of perceiving truths that noise obscures. Closely related is the habit of intention. Maimônides taught that every action should be infused with awareness of its purpose. When a person acts without intention, they descend to the level of instinct. When they act with intention, they elevate the action into meaning. Intention transforms ordinary tasks into spiritual acts because it aligns the external behavior with the internal pursuit of truth. These habits also shape a person's relationship with others. Maimônides believed that ethical behavior toward one's fellow human beings was not separate from spiritual devotion. It was integral to it. Compassion, patience, honesty, and generosity are not simply moral virtues. They are reflections of a soul aligned with wisdom. Habits that strengthen these virtues elevate both the self and the community. They create harmony within and around the individual. Ultimately, the spiritual synthesis that Maimônides describes is one of integration. The intellect, the emotions, and the body are not enemies. They are partners. The habits one cultivates must therefore speak to all three. They must strengthen the mind, refine the feelings, and guide the actions. When these faculties become aligned, the human being becomes whole. This wholeness is the foundation of spiritual ascent. It allows the individual to experience life with clarity, to seek truth with humility, and to walk through the world with dignity. It transforms daily habits into pathways of devotion. The value of wisdom is revealed only when it can be lived. Maimônides spoke endlessly of balance, clarity, virtue, and devotion, but he always guided his readers toward practice, toward daily choices that shape the architecture of the soul. The 10 habits presented here are rooted in that same spirit. They do not demand perfection. They simply ask for consistency, awareness, and sincerity. When practiced with intention, they become a framework for a calmer mind, a stronger character, and a more meaningful life. These habits are not arranged in order of importance, because their power comes from the way they reinforce one another. You may begin with any one of them or with several. What matters is not the number, but the spirit with which you practice them. Habit 1. Begin each day with clear intention. Maimônides taught that the mind must govern the emotions and actions. To do this, the mind must be awake from the very beginning of the day. Before you check your phone, before you allow the demands of the world to rush in, take a moment to clarify what kind of person you intend to be today. Not what you must do, but how you will do it. Intention shapes perception. When you begin the day deliberately, you reclaim authority over your time, your energy, and your conduct. This habit is small, but it reorders the entire day. Habit 2. Create one space of daily silence. In a world defined by noise, silence becomes a rare form of strength. Maimônides understood silence not as emptiness, but as mental presence. A daily practice of silence, whether it lasts 2 minutes or 10, trains the mind to settle. It sharpens awareness and allows the intellect to breathe. In silence, you hear the subtler movements of thought. You reclaim the ability to think independently rather than reactively. Even a brief moment of quiet reconnects you with your inner direction. Habit 3. Practice moderation in one area of life. Maimônides' golden mean can feel overwhelming when applied to every aspect of life at once. Begin with 1. Choose one area where you are prone to excess. Consumption, impulse, speech, work, rest, stimulation. Practice moderation intentionally there. By learning to find balance in a single domain, you strengthen the muscles of discipline and self-awareness. Soon, moderation becomes more natural, extending by itself into other areas. Balance is not a single act. It is a habit of the soul. Habit 4. Strengthen the body to support the mind. Maimônides, the physician, consistently emphasized physical health as the foundation for mental clarity. A weakened body burdens the mind, and a sluggish mind burdens the soul. You do not need extreme practices. Simple, consistent care is enough. Drink water, move your body, sleep with intention, eat thoughtfully. These habits sharpen the intellect and elevate the emotional state. When the body is respected, the inner faculties regain their strength. Habit 5. Engage in daily study. For Maimônides, study was not optional. It was the anchor of the intellectual and spiritual life. To study each day, even briefly, is to affirm that growth is continuous. Study refines the intellect, broadens perspective, and disciplines the mind. It introduces new ideas, dispels confusion, and connects you to generations of wisdom. Whether you read philosophy, science, history, or sacred texts, let your mind encounter something greater than your personal concerns each day. Through study, you rise. Habit 6. Examine yourself with honesty. Self-examination is one of the most powerful habits a human being can cultivate. Maimônides understood introspection as a means of aligning oneself with reality. When you reflect on your actions, your intentions, and your emotional tendencies, you become capable of correction and growth. Spend a few minutes each evening asking, what did I do well? What could I refine? Where was I led by impulse instead of reason? This habit cultivates humility, clarity, and ethical strength. Habit 7. Practice restraint in speech. Few habits shape the character as profoundly as the discipline of speech. Maimônides warned constantly about the dangers of unnecessary words. Speech influences emotion, directs thought, and affects relationships. Practice speaking with purpose. Avoid gossip, complaining, excessive self-display, or impulsive reactions. Restraint in speech creates space for thought. It cultivates dignity. It trains the emotions to be guided by intellect rather than agitation. A person who masters speech masters themselves. Habit 8. Cultivate gratitude intentionally. Gratitude purifies the heart. Maimônides saw gratitude as the recognition of one's place in the order of existence and as a means of softening the ego. Take time each day to acknowledge what sustains you. Health, knowledge, relationships, opportunities, breath, the simple fact of being alive. Gratitude turns the mind from scarcity to abundance, from anxiety to trust. It elevates perception. It reveals life as a gift rather than a burden. Habit 9. Treat others with measured compassion. Ethical behavior toward others is a reflection of inner harmony. Maimônides believed that true wisdom expresses itself in conduct, in kindness, patience, fairness, honesty, and generosity. Practice one small act of compassion or fairness each day. This does not require acts of grandeur. A moment of patience, a considerate word, a thoughtful gesture, an act of forgiveness. These shape the character and impact the world quietly but powerfully. Compassion trains the heart in balance. Habit 10. End each day with reflection and release. Maimônides understood the importance of closing each day intentionally. Reflection allows the mind to make peace with the day's events, to learn, and to release what no longer serves. A brief moment of evening contemplation calms the emotions, clarifies the mind, and prepares the soul for renewal. Ask yourself, what did I learn today? What burden can I lay down? What truth can I carry forward? This habit anchors the day in meaning. These 10 habits are simple in structure, but profound in effect. Each habit strengthens one dimension of the human being, intellect, emotion, or action, and together they create a harmony that elevates the entire life. They allow you to reclaim your attention, refine your character, and walk with greater dignity and clarity. They restore the sense that life can be shaped intentionally, not merely endured. When practiced consistently, these habits transform the inner environment. They cultivate a mind capable of concentration, a heart capable of stability, and a character capable of resilience. They produce a person who can meet life with depth rather than distraction, with purpose rather than chaos, with wisdom rather than impulse. This is the practical expression of Maimônides' teaching, that the human being is designed for ascent. Through daily habits, you train the soul to rise. Through discipline, you cultivate clarity. Through intention, you awaken meaning. Through balance, you return to yourself. And in returning to yourself, you approach truth, not in theory, but in lived experience. You walk a path that brings calm to the mind, refinement to the character, and illumination to the soul. This is the life Maimônides envisioned, a life shaped by wisdom, grounded in balance, and elevated by daily acts of intentional living.